Princess Liara sat alone in her private chamber, her fingers trembling over the edge of the golden table. The royal decree lay before her, the ink still sharp and bold, carrying words that changed her life forever. She had been born to rule, trained in diplomacy, strategy, and the art of appearing calm in front of a galaxy that constantly watched her. But none of her lessons had prepared her for this. The decree ordered her to marry a human, a species rare in her galaxy, almost legendary in its unpredictability. Humans were known for their strength, their boldness, their defiance of alien logic. They were wild, untested in interstellar politics, and often feared. Yet here it was, in black ink on white parchment. She was to unite her world with one. The alliance was not a choice. It was a command, and disobedience was unthinkable. Lyra's heart beat faster with every thought. She had always dreamed of love, of connection, of someone she could trust and understand. But this was not a dream. This was duty. She could feel the weight of generations pressing down on her slender shoulders, the lives of her people tied to her compliance. To refuse would mean war. To accept meant marrying a stranger from a distant, incomprehensible world. Her mind painted frightening images. She imagined a human groom towering over her, muscles tense and threatening, eyes cold and alien. She imagined a life of endless protocol, of silent dinners with a husband who could never understand her language, her traditions, her world. She shivered and hugged her knees. Even as she tried to push the fear away, it lingered like a shadow in every corner of the room. But Liara also felt a strange flicker of curiosity. Humans were unlike any being she had encountered, so unpredictable, so alive. Perhaps this stranger would surprise her. Perhaps there was courage hidden behind that unknown face, a kindness waiting to be revealed. She forced herself to breathe, trying to imagine that the human groom might be more than a symbol of obligation. Outside her chamber, the palace bustled with preparations. Servants moved like rivers through the corridors, arranging garments, decorations, and ceremonial artifacts. The city below awaited the announcement. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that made hearts beat faster even in the bravest of citizens. Liara felt a pang of isolation. Everyone else seemed ready to embrace their future, while she trembled at the thought of stepping into the unknown. Her advisor, an elderly woman with eyes sharp as crystal, entered quietly. "Princess," she said gently, "the human arrives tomorrow. You must prepare yourself." Her tone was firm, but not cruel. "This union is not merely political, it is a lifeline. Your people need you to stand tall." Liara nodded, though she felt weak. "But what if he is different?" She whispered, the words barely audible. "He is human." The advisor replied, a faint smile breaking the sternness of her face. "And humans are remarkable. You may find strength where you least expect it. Remember, your fear is natural, but it cannot rule your heart." That night, Liara lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling of her chamber. The moonlight poured through the tall windows, painting silver lines across her worried face. She tried to picture the human, to imagine what he looked like, what he thought, how he would treat her. The unknown gnawed at her courage, yet a tiny spark of hope lingered, a spark that maybe, just maybe, this marriage could be more than a duty. And so, with the decree resting heavy on her desk and her heart trembling in fear, Princess Liara faced the first night of uncertainty. Tomorrow she would meet her human groom. Tomorrow everything she had ever known would change. And though fear gripped her like a cold hand, a part of her could not help but wonder if this stranger could teach her something she had never imagined. That humans, in their unpredictable ways, could inspire courage even in a trembling princess. The morning sun spilled golden light across the palace courtyard. But it did little to calm Princess Lyra's racing heart. Today, she would meet her human groom for the first time. The thought made her stomach twist with nerves, her fingers clutching the folds of her ceremonial gown. She had imagined him as a towering, intimidating figure, perhaps cold and unfeeling, a stranger who would make her life rigid and constrained. But now, standing behind the palace doors, she could hear footsteps approaching, measured, confident, yet not menacing. When the doors swung open, she froze. He was not what she expected. The human stood tall, but not overly so. His posture was relaxed, his expression calm, and his eyes were bright and alert, filled with curiosity rather than judgment. They met hers immediately, unflinching, and for a moment, Liara felt as if he could see through every layer of fear she tried to hide. "Princess Liara," he said, bowing slightly, though it was clear his formality was learned rather than natural. "It is an honor to meet you." His voice carried a warmth she had not anticipated. It was steady and confident, yet gentle. She felt a strange pull in her chest, a sensation she could not name, part surprise, part relief, part something deeper. Her knees trembled, not from fear alone, but from the realization that this human might be different from the stories she had heard. Different from the warnings her elders had given. Liara nodded, her voice faltering. "I welcome you to our world." The words felt foreign on her tongue, heavy with the weight of duty, but also tinged with curiosity. She studied him, taking in the subtle details, the way he held his hands, the way he moved without haste, the way he seemed genuinely present in this moment. The human smiled again. A small but genuine curve of his lips. "I hope to learn from you, princess," he said softly. "And perhaps you can learn from me as well." Liara blinked. The confidence and humility together were confusing. No one had ever spoken to her like this, not a counselor, not a teacher, not even her closest advisors. He was bold but respectful, strong but careful. And strangely, she felt a thread of trust forming. Though she barely knew him, the palace attendants bustled around them, arranging ceremonial items, adjusting robes, and whispering instructions. Liara felt the weight of countless eyes upon her, expecting her to act gracefully, to remain composed. Yet the human did not falter, does not bow to protocol too deeply, and did not rush her. His calm presence became a small anchor in her storm of emotions. For the first time, Liara allowed herself to imagine the possibility that this marriage could be more than an obligation. Perhaps it could be a partnership, a bond forged in understanding and courage. Her pulse slowed slightly, replaced by a fragile hope that maybe this human, so strange and unpredictable, could teach her something new, not just about him, but about herself. Still, fear lingered at the edges of her mind. Could she trust someone so different? Could someone so strong in body and mind respect her, truly see her, beyond her title and duty? She bit her lip, trying to steady her trembling hands. The human stepped a little closer, not intruding, but closing the gap between them. "Princess Liara," he said again, this time with a softer tone, "I do not wish to frighten you. I only hope we can face the challenges ahead together." Liara felt an unexpected warmth in her chest. Her fear had not vanished, but it had shifted. What had been dread now carried a flicker of anticipation. She realized with a start that the trembling in her body was no longer just fear, it was the stirring of curiosity. The first spark of trust, and perhaps even the beginning of admiration. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, illuminating the palace and the gardens beyond, Princess Liara took a deep breath and lifted her chin. The human groom before her was unlike anyone she had imagined, and though her heart still quivered, a quiet thought took root. Maybe, just maybe, this stranger could be more than an obligation. And in that first glance, in the way he held himself, and in the unspoken promise in his steady gaze, Liara felt the tiniest seed of hope bloom, hope that this meeting could change her life in ways she had never dared to dream. The day of the ceremony arrived with the sky painted in shades of amber and gold. The palace corridors buzzed with preparations, the air heavy with anticipation and whispers of awe. Princess Liara's heart pounded like a drum inside her chest. She had rehearsed the steps, the words, the gestures, but the thought of standing before the galaxy and beside her human groom made her pulse race uncontrollably. She walked slowly down the long aisle, the hem of her gown brushing softly against the marble floor. Her eyes kept darting to him, the human she barely knew. He stood with quiet confidence, calm and composed, yet he seemed to notice every little tremor in her posture, every anxious glance. His steady presence was a strange comfort. Like a lighthouse in a storm she could not control, the crowd of nobles, dignitaries, and emissaries from countless worlds stared, their eyes curious, critical, and expectant. Liara felt the weight of generations pressing down upon her, the hopes of her people riding on her shoulders. She swallowed hard, trying to hold back the fluttering in her stomach. She had feared this moment for so long, yet here she was, walking toward the unknown, her human groom waiting at the end of the aisle with eyes that seemed to tell her silently, "You are not alone." When they finally stood together, he bowed his head with a respectful inclination, a gesture that struck her with its simplicity and sincerity. The officiant began the ceremony, chanting words older than any living memory. Liara's lips trembled as she recited the ancient vows, her voice cracking at times, betraying her nervousness. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but the human beside her never wavered. He followed each word with precision, yet his voice carried a warmth and steadiness that anchored her in the moment. At one point, their hands touched, brushing lightly. Liara's heart leaped. She expected nothing, feared nothing, and yet this simple contact sent a strange calm through her, as if an unspoken promise had passed between them. She dared to look into his eyes, and in them she saw more than strength. She saw understanding, patience, and perhaps a hint of kindness. The ceremony pressed on, elaborate rituals marking the joining of their lives, their worlds, and their destinies. Liara tried to focus on the words, on the customs, on maintaining her composure, but her thoughts kept returning to him. What kind of human was he, that he could stand so calm among strangers, lights, and ceremonies, yet still make her feel safe? How could someone she barely knew inspire courage within her trembling heart? As the final words of the ceremony were spoken, Liara felt the weight on her chest lighten. It was done. She was married. Yet the fear that had gripped her for weeks had not completely vanished. It had changed shape. It became something quieter, something more fragile. Like the softest pulse of wind before a storm breaks, the crowd erupted into applause, their voices echoing through the grand hall. Liara's gaze returned to the human beside her. He smiled gently, as if to reassure her that he understood every flicker of uncertainty she felt. "You did well," he whispered softly, just loud enough for her to hear. Her lips quivered into a faint smile. I didn't know I could," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the noise. He nodded, his hand still brushing hers. "And you didn't have to do it alone." For the first time, Liara realized that perhaps this marriage, forced though it was, held the possibility of something more. The unknown no longer felt completely terrifying. There was trust forming, delicate and quiet, growing in the spaces between fear and hope. And though the day had been long, exhausting, and filled with expectation, she felt the faint stirrings of something new inside her, an ember of courage, a spark of connection, and the tiny promise that perhaps her human groom was not just a stranger, but a companion she could come to respect, and maybe even admire. As the ceremony concluded, and they walked side by side out of the grand hall, Liara's gaze lingered on him. She did not know what the future held, but she felt one undeniable truth. This human, so strange, so unpredictable, had already begun to change her heart. The palace had barely settled into the quiet after the ceremony when the alarms rang. Red lights flooded the halls, and the sound of klaxons shook even the bravest attendants. Raiders, fast, ruthless, and armed with unfamiliar weapons, were attacking the city. Panic spread like wildfire. Princess Liara's heart leapt into her throat as she clutched her gown, frozen in fear. She had never imagined that so soon after the marriage, her life would be tested in such a way. The human groom, however, did not flinch. His calmness was almost impossible to believe. While Liara's mind raced with dread, he moved with precise, deliberate steps. Observing the chaos, he scanned the area, noting exits, potential threats, and people in immediate danger. Liara's chest tightened. How could he remain so composed when everything she knew and loved was under attack? "Princess, stay close to me," he said, his voice steady, firm, and reassuring. It was the first time she noticed the depth of authority in his tone, not born from titles, but from a raw, human confidence that demanded trust. She hesitated for only a moment before following him, her fear still present, but now mixed with a fragile thread of hope. As they moved through the corridors, Liara saw him in action. He didn't charge recklessly into the fight like the stories she had heard about humans. Instead, he assessed each situation, making calculated decisions that minimized harm to civilians. He lifted debris to free trapped servants, shielded children with his own body, and deflected attacks with surprising agility. Each act seemed almost impossible, yet he executed them flawlessly. Liara's fear began to shift to awe. This human, whom she had expected to be strange and weak, was showing a courage and intelligence that transcended everything she had known about strength. A group of raiders cornered them in the grand library, weapons drawn. Liara froze, paralyzed with terror. But he stepped forward, placing himself between her and danger. "Step back," he commanded, not angrily, but with an unshakable authority. He used quick, precise movements to disarm them, relying not on brute force alone, but on observation, speed, and understanding. Liara gasped. Humans were supposed to be fragile, yet here he was, facing the unknown without hesitation, without fear. When the raiders finally retreated, the city alarms still blaring, Liara's legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, shaking. The human knelt beside her, offering his hand. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes searching hers for more than just safety. They sought understanding, reassurance, and perhaps the first signs of trust. Liara grasped his hand, and for the first time, She felt her own fear begin to ease. I thought I would lose everything, she admitted, her voice trembling. You won't, he said simply. Not while I am here. She looked at him, trying to comprehend the reality before her. She had expected a stranger, someone strange and untested, someone she might fear for the rest of her life. Instead, she saw someone extraordinary, someone who acted with a combination of courage, empathy, and intelligence that left her speechless. In that moment, something changed. Liara realized that the trembling in her heart was no longer just from fear of the unknown. It was from something else, something she had not dared to name. Admiration? Respect? Or perhaps a fragile beginning of trust, of connection, of hope. The human had proven himself not through words, but through action, and she could no longer see him as just an obligation. As the city's defenses rallied and the raiders retreated into the night, Liara stood beside her human groom, her fear slowly transforming into something she could scarcely understand. The test had come unexpectedly, and it had revealed the truth. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but also capable of courage and loyalty beyond imagination. And this human, her husband by duty, had already shown her a strength that even centuries of tradition had never taught. For the first time, Liara dared to hope that perhaps this marriage, forced though it had been, could become something more. Days passed after the attack. Yet the memory of fear still clung to Princess Liara like a shadow. The city had survived, thanks to her human groom, whose courage and quick thinking had saved countless lives. She watched him move among the people, helping wherever needed, his calm presence inspiring confidence in those who had feared the worst. Liara found herself drawn to him, even though she had barely known him before the attack. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep crimson, Liara found herself alone with him in a quiet garden. The palace noises were distant, leaving only the soft rustle of leaves and the distant calls of night birds. She hesitated, unsure if she could speak, her heart caught between curiosity and fear. "Princess," he said, noticing her hesitation. "You have been quiet. Is something troubling you?" Liara's lips quivered. She had always been trained to hide her emotions, to mask uncertainty behind polite smiles. But now, standing before someone who had proven himself in ways she could not ignore, she felt a strange urge to be honest. I do not understand humans," she admitted. "You face danger without hesitation, yet you do not seem cruel. You act boldly, but never carelessly. Why?" He smiled faintly, the kind that reached his eyes and made them seem warmer, softer. "Because people matter, Princess. Every life matters. Fear does not guide me, it informs me. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite it. And I promise to protect you. That promise is worth everything." Liara stared at him, her chest tightening. She had spent her entire life surrounded by advisors, generals, and politicians, yet none had ever spoken to her like this. He was not simply following rules or performing protocol. He spoke from his heart, honestly and plainly, and somehow it made her own heart ache with an unfamiliar emotion. I thought I would never trust anyone again," she whispered, tears threatening to fall. "Not after all I have seen, all I have endured, and yet, here I am." He reached out, gently lifting her hand, holding it as if it were the most fragile object in the world. "Then trust me, Princess. You do not need to fear alone anymore. I will not let harm reach you, not while I can prevent it. And even beyond that, I wish to learn you, to understand you, to be more than just your guard or your duty." Liara's walls, built over years of duty, tradition, and fear, began to crumble. She had always believed that the human beside her was a stranger, someone she had to obey or endure. But now she realized he saw her as a person, not a title. He respected her mind, her choices, and even her fear without judgment. She had never known such honesty, and it left her trembling, not from fear, but from the intensity of emotions she could not yet name. For hours, they walked among the fragrant flowers and softly glowing lights of the garden. He spoke of his world, of the human strange customs, and their belief in courage, loyalty, and hope. She listened, fascinated, and began to share stories of her childhood, of her people, of the pressures and expectations she carried. For the first time, she felt heard, truly heard, without judgment or expectation. By the time the moon rose high, casting silver over the palace walls, Liara realized something profound. The fear that had ruled her heart was no longer absolute. In its place was a cautious trust, fragile but growing. She had been forced into this marriage, yes, but she was beginning to see that this human grew so strange. So unpredictable might be the one person who could teach her courage, companionship, and even a form of love she had never imagined possible. As they parted that night, his hand lingering briefly in hers, Liara whispered softly, "Thank you for seeing me." He simply smiled, a quiet, steady smile. Always. And in that moment, Princess Liara knew that her trembling heart had begun to change, not from fear, but from the first gentle stirrings of trust, admiration, and hope. Weeks turned into months, and the palace slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Yet for Princess Liara, nothing felt ordinary anymore. The human groom, once a stranger she had feared, had become a quiet anchor in her life. He was present in every council meeting, every city inspection, every strategy discussion, but more importantly, he had become present in her thoughts, her reflections, and her heart. Liara had observed him in countless situations, calm under pressure, decisive without arrogance, and gentle with those weaker or frightened. The way he lifted a child who had been separated from their parents during a festival, or how he offered a reassuring hand to an elderly servant, left her in awe. She had grown to understand that humans measured strength differently than her people did. Strength was not only in command or titles. Strength was in courage, loyalty, and the willingness to stand for what mattered. And in that, he excelled. One evening, Liara found herself in the palace library, a place where she had spent countless hours studying politics and history. The human was already there, reading a strange book of human philosophy, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up and smiled when he noticed her. "You spend too much time alone, Princess," he teased gently. Lyra's lips curved in a faint smile. "And you spend too much time reading things I cannot understand," she replied, a small spark of humor in her voice. He closed the book and gestured for her to sit beside him. "Then teach me to understand your world, and I will try to teach you mine." For hours they exchanged ideas, stories, and traditions. He listened with patience and asked questions that made her think deeply, not because he doubted her, but because he genuinely wanted to know. In turn, he shared stories of Earth, of human struggles and triumphs, of courage born in small moments of kindness or daring decisions. Liara found herself laughing, imagining worlds she had never known, feeling a closeness she had never thought possible with someone she had barely met before her marriage. Over time, their partnership began to shift into something subtler and more profound. Liara no longer felt forced. She felt chosen, even in small ways. The human valued her opinions, respected her judgments, and included her in plans not as a ceremonial princess, but as a partner. Slowly, admiration blossomed into something tender, something delicate that neither of them named aloud, but both felt deeply. One night, after a long day of council meetings and city inspections, Liara found herself leaning on the balcony, staring at the starlit city. The human stepped beside her, his hand brushing lightly against hers. She did not pull away. "You've changed," he said softly, his gaze on the horizon. "Not just because of what you do, but because of who you allow yourself to be." Liara turned to him, surprised by the depth in his words. "And you make it easier to be brave," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, a quiet, steady smile that seemed to carry the weight of understanding and the promise of protection. "Because I believe in you," he said. "And because humans, we see what others overlook. We see the courage inside, even when it is hidden by fear." Liara felt her chest tighten. His words were simple, but they carried a truth that resonated in every fiber of her being. For the first time, she realized that she was no longer trembling out of fear. She was trembling from admiration, trust, and a growing bond that neither protocol nor duty could define. As the night stretched on, they stood side by side, gazing at the stars. The city below was calm, safe, and thriving, yet more importantly, Liara felt a quiet certainty in her heart. The human beside her was no longer just a groom assigned by duty. He was a companion, a guide, a protector. And perhaps, though she dared not say it yet, something far more meaningful. And in that quiet moment, under the silver glow of the stars, Princess Liara understood the truth she had been too afraid to admit. The bond forming between them was real, and it had the power to transform not just her life, but the world around them. The city trembled under the shadow of a new threat. Intelligence had warned that a rival faction would strike, seeking to destabilize the fragile alliance between humans and Lyra's people. The princess stood on the balcony, her hands gripping the railing, the weight of her people pressing on her chest. Beside her, her human groom remained calm, his presence steady like a rock in the midst of a storm. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying neither fear nor hesitation. Liara took a deep breath. She had been forced into this marriage, yes, but she was no longer the trembling girl who feared the unknown. She had seen courage firsthand, had felt the warmth of trust, had experienced loyalty and partnership in a way that defied every expectation she had held of humans. And now, standing beside him, she felt the first true sense of power in her own hands, not from titles or commands, but from choice. The attack came swiftly, but the city was ready. Liara and her groom moved through the corridors of command together, their strategies aligning perfectly. Civilians were evacuated efficiently, defenses reinforced, and the defenders inspired by their leader's unwavering courage. Liara watched him in action, his mind sharp, calculating, and yet full of compassion. He did not strike recklessly. He struck where it mattered, saving lives rather than chasing glory. In the heart of the battle, Liara found herself facing a group of intruders who had breached the inner palace walls. Her pulse quickened, but she did not falter. The human appeared at her side, shielding her without question. "Trust yourself," he said. "And trust me." She did. With him covering her, she guided the defenders, issuing orders that blended her knowledge of the palace with his human intuition. Together, they outmaneuvered the invaders, each action precise, each decision deliberate. Their partnership, born of fear and duty, strengthened through trust and understanding, became unstoppable. Finally, the last of the intruders were captured or driven off. The city was safe. The night air, heavy with smoke and the scent of battle, began to clear. Liara looked around at the people, the citizens she had been trained to protect, and saw them cheering, not just for survival, but for the leaders who had inspired them. Turning to her human groom, she felt a rush of emotion she could not contain. "I feared this marriage," she admitted softly, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with gratitude and awe. "I thought I would be alone in facing everything. But you changed everything." He took her hands in his, holding them gently, firmly. "We changed it together," he said. "I only did what any human would do for someone they care about. But you led with wisdom, courage, and heart. You've grown stronger than you know." Liara's chest tightened. Her eyes glistened as she realized the truth she had been too afraid to name. This marriage, once a command and a chain, had become a bond born of respect, trust, and admiration. She no longer trembled at the thought of him. She looked at him with certainty, with gratitude, and with a spark of something far deeper. The stars above reflected in their eyes as they stood together. The city safe, their people inspired, and their bond unbreakable. For the first time in her life, Liara understood what it truly meant to choose courage over fear, trust over doubt, and hope over despair. "You are more than I ever imagined," she whispered. Her voice steady now. "And so are you," he replied, smiling softly. "The galaxy tried to force us into a life we did not want. But we chose this life together, and that choice makes all the difference." In that moment, under the silver glow of a victorious night sky, Princess Liara realized the full power of the human beside her. Not strength of body, nor weapons, nor speed, but courage, loyalty, and heart. She had been forced into marriage, yet she had gained a companion who inspired her to be brave, who stood with her as an equal, and who showed her that humans, strange, unpredictable, and fearless, could change a galaxy simply by standing for what was right. And so, together, they faced the future not as ruler and subject, not as stranger and stranger, but as partners bound by choice, courage, and an unbreakable trust that would echo through the stars for generations to come.